Welcome everybody at the Innovation Café. Thanks for joining. We just had a talk by Himanshi about fairness in AI, and we're now going to go into the Q&A and discussion. Innovation Café normally is a live event, but due to the situation, we are back online. And normally we're always live with an audience. We have talks like Himanshi did today, and afterwards drinks, and it's all meant to show you what the tech design and knowledge community of Eindhoven and surroundings has to offer. But like I said, right now we're online. This edition was made possible with Art and Tech Society. Mayra is representing them today, and she will go into discussion with Himanshi a little bit about what she just talked about. So hereby I want to give the word to Mayra. Also, for the people at home, if you have some questions, put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can ask the question yourself by audio. Mayra, please take the word.
Yes, thank you, Margot. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mayra Ortega Maldonado, and I'm the initiator and manager of Art and Tech Society. During the last 3 months, as part of our program Cultural Expeditions, we are organizing several of events about the topic technology and smart societies. And this is one of the last events we have about this topic, and that was about assessing the fairness of algorithms. So we really thank you, Himanshi Allahabadi, for this presentation. It was very insightful, and now is a time to make questions to Himanshi, but also Himanshi will make questions to the people. So yes, please, Himanshi. Thanks for this.
Thank you, Mayra, and thanks, Margot, for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. Hello, everyone who's joined in this session for discussion. I want to hear from you about what does fairness mean to you, or what does it not mean to you? Have you ever been in a situation where you found things to be unfair, but it's too subjective and you feel like there's no way you could objectively prove that something is unfair because that experience is unique to you? And if so, then do you have any solutions or suggestions to how can we incorporate the beliefs and opinions of different people and engage them into a larger discussion such as this, or a smaller discussion? And how would you like to hear your voice in policy making and law making, especially when it comes to automated decision making?
Anyone who would like to? Can't see.
I have a question, actually, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think I didn't see the full presentation earlier, but I got a moment where I think I heard that the presenter thought that fairness was relative to, I guess, personal circumstances. I don't think I understand. Yeah, can we have some clarification on this? So is fairness a relative concept, or can you define this in a very general way?
Yeah, so it's not ultimately a relative concept if you think of it as a proxy for justice. So if your end goal is justice, then fairness, it's subjective. It's subjective for different people, and it needs to be really handled on a case-by-case basis. But it's relative in the sense that different fairness definitions exist, and they cannot all be used in every context. So you have to be really careful about which definition you go for for different cases. So that's what I think you caught up on with the relative fairness. about defining it in a really general term, it's really difficult, and that's something that people have been trying to do, but part of my study was to investigate into how these different fairness notions come together. Can they be satisfied simultaneously, or do they sometimes contradict each other? And it's true, sometimes fairness definitions can actually be mathematically incompatible in certain situations. Um, so yeah, it's really difficult to define it.
Do you have an example of two fairness definitions or situations that are incompatible with each other?
Yeah. So the proof is quite mathematical, but the example is the same that I took during my presentation, which is about equality of opportunity and calibration of odds. So these are two different definitions for algorithmic fairness, which both seem to make sense and appeal to different people, but they are mathematically incompatible. And also, you could have a predictor which actually satisfies both the metrics to certain degrees in certain situations, but that would still not make the classifier fair, because you would have the adverse effect of your protected attributes on the actual outcomes through all these different pathways, these different cause and effect mechanisms. Um, so the overall takeaway from that is that fairness, it can vary for different applications and also for different individuals within the same context.
So I guess we have to define those things for the entire society. Like the entire society has to agree on some definition of fairness in various sectors of life. That's how it should work, I guess. Like, so different countries with different cultural environments would define fairness in a different way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's really, like I said before, it's fairness ultimately is a proxy for justice, which is inherently a human individual thing. And fairness, yeah, you can have a specific definition for everyone, but it would still not be ultimately just. And so there's no point of that fairness, which doesn't serve you justice. For example, the equality definition says that people should get all people should get equal treatment based on whatever other things that are happening to them should not affect the outcomes of certain decisions, which makes sense for certain contexts, but not always, because there's also this slightly contradictory notion of equity within justice, which means that people should not get equal treatment, but they should get treatment based on their own privileges or lack thereof. So an example of this could be if you're trying to predict your, let's say, SAT scores or law school scores, and you're trying to figure out whether somebody would be successful or not, or whether somebody would have a certain GPA after their first year, and you include different attributes. For example, the test scores, the entrance examination test scores in previous years, GPAs, high school maybe, and you could also include whether or not that person has a job, and then in that there are a lot of different things that come into play. For example, your race could affect your economic status, which could ultimately affect whether or not you have a job, which could also affect how you perform at school. So different people could also handle that differently. For example, some people might be doing better at school even if they have a job, and some people might not. But they still have a relative disadvantage in terms of their demographics. So in those specific cases, how do you really define a single definition of fairness which can be used for everyone. You can't. To actually be just, you have to be equitable. And equity in algorithms is a very difficult problem to solve.
So, Himanshi, can I conclude that fairness is also, it depends on the culture of the society that is making that definition. So the definition of fairness in China can be different than the definition in Europe or United States. And that means that the way the algorithms will be judged or will be defined has to be very different than in every different country or region.
Right. Yeah, that's also a factor because, for example, certain community-based cultures might be more attracted to notions that revolve around fairness for groups. So different groups of people should have the same opportunities and rights. And especially in countries where there's a lot of diversity in cultures and groups and religions, that notion kind of would predominate their idea of what is fair. But if you're in a more individualistic society, or if you're in, let's say, the Netherlands or Germany, where the diversity is still kind of limited, and you can see that there are clear minorities, in their beliefs, individual fairness would precede all these other definitions of fairness, and the idea that similar people should be treated the same would also not appeal to their idea of it serving individual justice, that is giving considering every individual with their own background and history and everything.
So thank you. I wonder what the people, I don't know, Javier or Elena think about it, and how if it's fairness society problem that we need to discuss and we need to talk about it before put it in machines like artificial intelligence. How we will do that, because in the last part of the presentations of Himanshi, we see that this automated decision-making process is going to be the trend in the future. It's slowly coming, but it's going to be more. So how do you think, for instance, Javier or Elena, that we need to make a stop, or we need to become really conscious about what these machines can provide us, and should be in a positive way? What do you think about it, Javier or Elena?
Hi, it's Elena speaking here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Elena.
Okay, that's good. Well, sorry, first of all, I joined just at the beginning of the Q&A, so I will just improvise based on my background and not based on the presentation. I think there is a link with ethics. So fairness is linked to what we think is ethical. But as what Himanshi was illustrating in the previous question, if there is no universal rule, how can we put this into an algorithm that normally, based on the same input, gives the same output? So for my knowledge, an algorithm is just as a static programming. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong, because nowadays algorithms can teach themselves and evolving things, but I don't think they are flexible in adapting to, if they choose one thing, they choose it independently on what is the person there and what is the situation based on the same data. So it sounds to me a very, very complicated issue, and that's why I really wanted to participate tonight. I was kind of triggered by the topic.
Thank you for joining. And yeah, you're right that it is a very complex topic because it's not just an issue in the technical community, it's an issue in society, and they're kind of intermingled with each other because the data that's used in technical context is also biased because it's coming from human beings and from real world observations, and human beings can be biased. So yes, it's very difficult to define a single solution for all these problems. One direction that I discussed towards the end of the presentation was about counterfactual fairness, which means to imagine in a hypothetical world, if everything else was the same but your race was different, then how would the outcome change? Does anyone have any thoughts about that definition of fairness? Does that feel right to you? This idea that that everything else being the same within the algorithm, within the data set itself, if you imagine that only certain sensitive attributes are switched, then how would the outcome react? Does that idea of fairness appeal to you, or is that still missing something for someone? Or if you have any other input.
David, did you want to say something?
No, first I let Elena go first, but now I'm stuck in thought. So yeah, difficult subject. Yeah.
Another question is also okay.
I do think it also really depends on the subject you're making the algorithm for, and can differ for a company or for political, or when you say policy making for the government or for.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's one solution that fits all. I think it really depends a lot. Unfortunately, to make it more difficult.
Yeah. That's true. And I think I showed like a cause-effect model in the presentation. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late joining. Yeah.
Okay. But that's like that's a way of it's a kind of method to represent information which goes beyond the correlations that artificial intelligence or machine learning usually finds. So what it's internally it's doing is that it's a black box, and there are correlations that it finds through these statistical variations in the distributions, and then it internally gives them a causal interpretation. And that's also why we sometimes hear that correlation is not causation, and in the data science community we hear that a lot. But then no one ever does anything about that, because that's what algorithms do. They just take these correlations and give them a causal interpretation. And that's where a lot of these problems of fairness happen, because the data set might have certain correlations that might not even actually exist in the real world, let alone be fair. So then how do we deal with those kind of issues in algorithms is a really interesting question. And the topic of causality, of cause-effect relationships, and studying such relationships in the nature, in the data, it can provide some insights into how discrimination is actually present and the patterns of it and the trends of it in the data set. And that can definitely help you make better algorithmic choices as well.
Yeah, if your algorithm doesn't get too smart, because I heard that Facebook doesn't even know how its algorithm works any longer. With the ads they were showing for the elections this week, they didn't even know why algorithms were making some choices. And
interesting. Yeah, I think it's quite a scary prospect as well to think about machines and algorithms making these decisions for us that are not explainable, that we don't really have proper white box explanations for.
But I wonder, a question for the public. I wonder how would you react if algorithms will decide for you in a, for instance, in the medical sector, for instance, if they give you some medicines or indicate what medicines you have to take because of based on your race, lifestyle, and gender. If you will really follow that advice, or what will be your reaction about it? So this kind of events will happen more often in the future. And this will be about the insurance company, or as mentioned, Himanshi, respect to the allowance to get or not a loan from bank or from other institutes. So how is going to be your reaction, your personal reaction about it? I wonder if Benoit wants to share some comments with us.
On those algorithms, yeah, you know, I triggered on this earlier because you know, I think those algorithms that we make and the biases that they contain, they only contain the biases that we put in them ourselves.
Yep.
In the training data. And so, you know, I guess one way to start to correcting things is to recognize that the training data are biased, and then identify clearly why they are, in what way they are biased. Maybe that's not always that obvious, actually. But for sure, it's something that we have to be conscious about and find a solution for. Otherwise, those algorithms will, follow the same biases and actually amplify them in crazy ways. They will, amplify the biases that we already have in our societies.
Yeah, that's definitely true, that bias is kind of engineered into the system through humans and through our observations. And the example that Maya was taking about personalized medicine and healthcare, an example of that would be if you're trying to predict what kind of healthcare to provide to different people based on based on the level of sickness, let's say. And if in the data you choose to use the healthcare spending as a proxy for the level of illness or level of sickness of the person, because the logic of that being that the more you spend, more likely it is that you are more ill. But that doesn't take into account the bias of people's access to healthcare, which could be correlated with their race, with their demographic, economic status, and all those kinds of things.
When you think about race bias, you already have those, like, you know, even in the medical sciences and all the, let's say, the medicines that are made, it is, I mean, especially in the US, they can see that actually a lot of treatments work better on, let's say, Caucasian people than on Black people.
That's a different issue, I think.
No, but
that has
I would
to do
say,
with your genetics.
Yeah, well, you know, in a way, so there is a bias in the way the treatments were made. So, you know, you have a training data set for your algorithms, and you make your correlations based on that training set. And when you know, test the efficacy of a treatment, you also have a population test. If your population test is white, male, well, already even white female are disadvantaged by this approach. And you see that it's again a bias that you put in there. It's not an algorithm, but it's exact same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the end, you get the same result.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what the presentation also talked about. If there's just a bias in how you sample data, that's easy to solve. But if there's bias in the processes that we ourselves engineer into the data, then that's a little bit harder to mitigate. But yeah, the personalized healthcare example, if you instead of choosing that attribute of how much they spend, if you make a better choice of some other attribute which might help you more, for example, how many or some other signifier of the level of their disease. I'm not able to think of one right now, but not health spendings and not a variable which is highly correlated with all these other factors, then you already have a better algorithm based on the choices that you make. So one of the most basic things to do in situations like these is to be really, really mindful of the algorithmic choices in terms of what data you allow into the system and what you don't. And even within the attributes that you do allow into the system, is there a possibility of them being biased based on race or other attributes? And is that bias justifiable? That's the main thing. Because for example, in an admissions case, or if you take UCI admissions, there's a really famous example of gender bias there. But what they found there was that women apply to different departments than men, and those departments have different acceptance rates than men. So those the two rates are so different, the two distributions are so different for men and for women, that if you try to make some kind of cause effect assumptions on that, then there's a huge paradox in your results. But that's the thing, it's not really always about the algorithm, it's about the data set, like you said.
It's the input. It's really what you put in, and sometimes you can have the best intentions, but you don't realize your own biases, but you put them in there anyway. And that's very hard to correct.
Yeah, that is true. It's a very difficult problem, and it's an open problem. Actually, it's an open problem by the European Commission, and they want to leverage big data in a fair way. So currently, all these big websites, and they're just not allowed to collect this information without your permission. But they still want to use, especially in lawmaking, they do want to use your data in a fair, ethical way, but they don't really know how. So it's an open question on how to effectively use big data without introducing any bias in your system, in your decision making.
Maybe we should give up on this and give up on the idea that we cannot introduce any bias and just actually put in their biases that we want. I don't know.
Like what kind of biases do you want?
No, but I'm thinking, for example, when you want to correct for, I don't know, maybe what I was thinking about, I don't know if that's properly related, but I was thinking people who want to go to university, for example, they so you can have biases there in terms of money and this kind of thing, and or race. And so if you would like to correct for that, then you could discriminate and say, well, let's get more black people or more female, whatever, you know, and so you would try to bias your algorithm in order to help a minority, for example, something like this.
Okay. You mean like reverse discrimination or something, or?
Right, right. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying that's an example of introducing a bias to correct something.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, and intuitively has been used in algorithms as well. So yes, it's not technically unfeasible or something, but then again, you have to, when we talk about fairness, its ultimate goal is justice. So that changes things, because if the TUE is wants to increase its gender diversity, and it chooses to do that by not employing any male candidates for 2 years or 1 whole year, that's not really a good example of justice, is it? You can improve your diversity.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's why I said that it was maybe not a good idea. Like, you know, this idea of sort of positive discrimination. I don't know. I'm not very comfortable myself with it. It's just an example of how you can introduce a bias. But do you want to do this? Nah, I don't know.
Yeah, I get it. There are a lot of solutions in a lot of different problem spaces and different fields that have been suggested, and it's still an open problem. So this talk wasn't really about coming up with some conclusion on this, and I don't think that we have the capacity to do that. I definitely don't, but maybe someone out there will have some definition of fairness which is just for everyone involved.
We have 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes to finish this conversation. I wonder if there's one person that getting to in the last minute, Anon. I wonder if Anon wants to say some words about it, and then Himanshi made the last closing words. Anon, do you want to comment something about the topic that has been discussed today? No, probably not.
May I ask something then?
Yeah, Javier, please.
They say democracy is the best of the bad systems, but can you democratize the data? Is that a fair way to approach it? For instance, with the doctors, that you ask all the doctors to fill out a questionnaire. Yeah, perhaps a simple example, but is that fairness? Then yeah, it's fairness of what the majority thinks is fair.
You tell me, do you think it's fair if the majority thinks it's fair? Or do you think that it has to be on the basis of the individual's, for example, how, if you're not in somebody else's situation, how can you fairly assess it? And there's just a fundamental difference in how we see ourselves and how we see others, right?
Interesting topic. Yes. So unfortunately, we can still talk like for hours here, but we have to close. So I really appreciate that you've been here. Thanks a lot, Himanshi, for this time. I would like to close this with giving some announcements, because next week, November 11, we have an open discussion, which is a little bit different topic. It's about envisioning the future in 2021, and it's been organized by an Equal Table, which is an open discussions, also as part of Art and Tech Society. And I also would like to invite you to our Future Making Lab, which is a group of professionals and students who wants to contribute making the city much nicer, livable, and more fair. So this is going to happen in November 26th. But if you have more, want to know more, please take a look at our website. It's about artandtechnology.org. So thank you for being here, and thanks a lot so much.
Thank you, Maya. And if anyone has further questions or wants to discuss more about this subject or about my thesis, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you, guys. We just wanted to say thanks for joining. Next week, we have a new Innovation Café, also online, by Team Virtue, where they're going to talk about sustainable living. So we hope to see you then again. And yeah, thanks for joining and have a nice evening. So that's it.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.